This message does not arrive by accident. It appears only in the narrow passage between who you have been and who you are becoming. If these words have found you, it is not because you searched for them, but because something within you has begun to loosen its grip on the life you once called home. There is a moment before every transformation when the old world starts to feel strangely unfamiliar. What once made sense begins to feel heavy. What once fit now constricts. You may not be able to name what is changing, only that something is quietly unraveling beneath the surface of your days. This is not confusion. It is initiation. Before a snake sheds its skin, it becomes restless. Before a star collapses into a new form, its light flickers. Before consciousness expands, reality begins to signal that the previous structure can no longer hold you. What follows is not motivation nor instruction. It is recognition. These chapters are not meant to teach you something new, but to name what you are already sensing. Read slowly. Not everything here is for the mind. Some truths are only understood by the part of you that is already halfway across the threshold. Keep this private, not because it is forbidden, but because not everyone is standing where you are now. Chapter 1. The Quiet Discomfort. There is a kind of discomfort that does not announce itself loudly. It does not arrive as crisis or catastrophe. It slips in quietly, almost politely, disguising itself as restlessness, boredom, or a vague sense that something is off, even when everything appears to be fine. This discomfort is not pain in the traditional sense. It is more like a pressure beneath the surface of your days, a subtle tightening in the chest when you imagine your future continuing exactly as it is, a strange fatigue that sleep does not seem to cure, a low hum of dissatisfaction that has no obvious cause. Most people ignore this signal. They label it as ingratitude, burnout, or a temporary phase. They distract themselves, medicate it with productivity, entertainment, or busyness, hoping it will fade. But this discomfort is not a malfunction. It is a message. Long before your life changes externally, it shifts internally. And the first sign is almost always this quiet unease. The sense that the shape of your current life no longer matches the shape of who you are becoming. What makes this discomfort so confusing is that it often appears when nothing is wrong. Your life may be stable. You may be doing everything you were taught to want. From the outside, it may even look like you are succeeding. Yet inside, something feels misaligned. This is not self-sabotage, and it is not weakness. It is not a lack of discipline or gratitude. It is expansion pressing against old boundaries. When consciousness outgrows its container, it sends signals. The discomfort is not asking you to destroy your life. It is asking you to listen. Think of a tree whose roots have outgrown the pot it was planted in. The pot has not failed the tree. It served its purpose. But if the tree continues to grow, the pot must either crack or be replaced. Your discomfort is the pressure of growth. At first, it whispers. A passing thought. Is this all there is? A fleeting sense that you are repeating days rather than living them. A subtle loss of excitement for things that once energized you. Then it lingers. You notice yourself zoning out more often. You feel impatient without knowing why. You become more sensitive to noise, obligations, and expectations that never used to bother you. This sensitivity is not regression. It is refinement. Your system is becoming less tolerant of what no longer aligns. The mind, however, resists this message. It searches for problems to fix instead of truths to face. It asks, what am I doing wrong? Instead of what am I outgrowing? So you try to optimize the old life instead of questioning it. You rearrange the furniture in a house your soul has already begun to leave. But the discomfort persists. That is because this feeling does not exist to be solved. It exists to be honored. In ancient traditions, this phase was known as the call, not a call to action, but a call to awareness. It marked the moment when a person's inner world began to exceed the limits of their outer reality. Nothing dramatic happened at first. No lightning struck, no doors slammed shut, just a quiet knowing that the old way could no longer fully hold them. If you are experiencing this discomfort, it means something important. You are no longer asleep in your life, and awakening is rarely comfortable. The mind prefers predictability, even if it is unfulfilling. The nervous system prefers the familiar, even if it is constricting. So when growth begins, the body reacts before the mind understands. You may feel tired because you are carrying a life that no longer fits. You may feel irritable because your energy is being asked to sustain structures that are already dissolving internally. You may feel lost because the old map no longer applies, but the new one has not yet revealed itself. This is the in-between state. It is not a mistake. It is a threshold. What makes this phase especially challenging is that it does not come with clear instructions. No one tells you what to do next. There is no checklist, no external validation, no guarantee. Only a quiet inner pressure urging you to pay attention. If you ignore it, it does not punish you. It simply grows louder, not to harm you, but to protect the part of you that is trying to emerge. This discomfort is not trying to take something away from you. It is trying to make room for a life that is more honest, more spacious, more aligned with who you are becoming rather than who you have been. Before any major transformation, there is always a period of unease, a loosening of attachments, a sense of internal disorganization. Think of it as the furniture being moved before a renovation. The chaos is temporary. The purpose is expansion. You are not broken for feeling this way. You are not ungrateful. You are not failing. You are responding correctly to an internal upgrade. The quiet discomfort is the signal that the old life has given you everything it could, and now something else is asking to be born. Do not rush to escape this feeling. Do not immediately label it as something to fix. Sit with it. It is not here to hurt you. It is here to tell you the truth. Chapter 2. When familiarity stops feeling safe. There comes a moment when familiarity, once comforting, begins to feel strangely unsafe. Not dangerous in the obvious sense, but suffocating. Predictable, heavy. This shift is subtle and deeply unsettling because familiarity is supposed to be reassuring. It is what the mind clings to in times of uncertainty. It is what we are taught to value as stability. So when the familiar begins to feel wrong, the mind panics. You may notice this as a growing resistance to routines you once relied on. A quiet dread at the thought of repeating the same conversations, the same obligations, the same future. A strange anxiety that arises not from chaos, but from sameness. This is not because familiarity has become harmful, it is because you have changed. Safety at its deepest level is not about predictability. It is about alignment. When you were younger, energetically, psychologically, spiritually, the familiar provided structure. It gave you a sense of orientation. It helped you survive, learn, and integrate. But growth alters what safety means. What once felt grounding can begin to feel restrictive. What once felt secure can begin to feel stagnant. What once felt like home can begin to feel like a holding pattern. The nervous system is often the first to register this change. You may feel inexplicably tense in environments that used to relax you. You may feel drained after interactions that were once effortless. You may feel restless even in situations designed for comfort. This is not your system malfunctioning. It is recalibrating. The body understands something before the mind does. You cannot grow and remain unchanged in the same conditions. Safety is not static. It evolves with you. When familiarity stops feeling safe, it is often because it no longer reflects your internal reality. You are being asked to update the external world to match who you have become internally. This is where many people get stuck. They confuse discomfort with danger. They assume that because something feels unsettling, it must be wrong. So they cling tighter to the familiar, even as it constricts them. But true danger at this stage is not change. It is stagnation. Remaining in environments that no longer align slowly erodes your vitality. It dulls your intuition. It teaches your nervous system to ignore its own signals. You begin to feel anxious without knowing why. You feel irritable without a clear cause. You feel disconnected from yourself. This is the cost of mistaking familiarity for safety. There is a reason ancient rites of passage involved leaving the village, the home, the known world. Growth requires separation. Not always physical, but energetic. At some point, staying becomes riskier than leaving. This does not mean you must immediately abandon your life. It means you must stop pretending that nothing is changing. When familiarity stops feeling safe, it is an invitation to reassess your definitions. What does safety actually mean to you now? Is it comfort or is it truth? Is it predictability or is it authenticity? The mind will argue for staying the same. It will present logical reasons, financial considerations, social expectations, fear of judgment. But the body speaks a different language. It speaks through tension, through fatigue, through a subtle sense of alarm when you imagine staying exactly where you are. This is not fear of the unknown. It is recognition that the known is no longer viable. You may notice yourself fantasizing about escape. Not a specific destination, but the feeling of relief that comes from imagining something different. More space, more breath, and more honesty. These fantasies are not frivolous. They are diagnostic. They show you where your current life is too tight. When familiarity stops feeling safe, you are standing at the edge of an identity shift. The version of you that fit comfortably into this life is dissolving, and the new version requires different conditions to thrive. This is why this phase can feel lonely. Others may not see what you see. They may encourage you to be grateful, to settle down, to stop overthinking. But you are not overthinking. You are outgrowing. The unease you feel around the familiar is not asking you to burn everything down. It is asking you to stop betraying yourself by pretending that what no longer fits still does. Safety in this next phase will not come from staying small. It will come from trusting your internal signals, from allowing your life to reorganize around who you are becoming. The familiar is not wrong for having served you, but it is not obligated to come with you into the next version of your life. Some things are meant to be honored, not carried forward. When familiarity stops feeling safe, it is because your soul has learned what it needed to learn there. And now it is preparing you to step into something larger. Not all at once, not recklessly, but honestly. This discomfort is not a warning sign. It is a green light, a quiet one, but unmistakable once you listen. You are not losing safety. You are redefining it. And what comes next will require a different kind of courage. The courage to trust that your inner sense of alignment is more reliable than the comfort of what you already know. Chapter 3. The life that can no longer contain you. There is a moment in every deep transformation when you realize that your life has not failed you. It has simply reached its limit. This realization does not arrive dramatically. It does not declare itself with clarity or confidence. It comes quietly, disguised as restlessness, irritability, or a growing sense that you are living slightly out of proportion with yourself. You wake up and go through the motions. You fulfill your responsibilities. You play your role well enough that no one suspects anything is wrong. Yet, beneath the surface, something feels compressed. It is as if your inner world has expanded, but the external structures of your life have remained the same size. And now they no longer fit. The job that once challenged you now feels repetitive. The conversations that once felt meaningful now feel scripted. The goals you work toward now feel oddly empty once you imagine achieving them. This is not ingratitude. It is not arrogance. It is not a failure to appreciate what you have. It is the unmistakable sensation of having grown beyond the shape of your current life. A life that once supported you can eventually restrict you, not because it is wrong, but because you are different now. Think of a shell that once protected a growing creature. At first, it is essential. It provides safety, structure, and containment. But if the creature continues to grow while the shell remains unchanged, the shell becomes a prison. Your life can become that shell. What makes this stage particularly painful is that nothing is technically broken. From the outside, your life may look fine, functional, even successful, but internally, there is a constant friction. You may notice a growing impatience with things that used to be tolerable. You may feel drained after days that are objectively easy. You may feel like you are constantly holding yourself back, editing your thoughts, shrinking your instincts. This is not because you have become difficult. It is because your life no longer matches your internal capacity. You are holding more awareness, more sensitivity, more depth than your current environment can accommodate. And this mismatch creates pressure. At first, the pressure shows up as discomfort, then as frustration, then, if ignored long enough, as numbness. This numbness is often mistaken for depression or laziness, but it is neither. It is the natural response of a system that has nowhere to put its excess energy. You may find yourself disengaging from things you once cared deeply about. Not because you no longer care, but because caring in this context feels pointless. Your inner world is ready for more complexity, more honesty, more meaning, but your outer world keeps offering the same patterns. So your energy withdraws. This withdrawal is not a flaw, it is self-protection. When a life can no longer contain you, something important happens. You begin to sense the limits of who you have been allowed to be. You see how much of yourself you have edited to fit, how many instincts you have suppressed to maintain harmony, how often you have chosen familiarity over truth. This awareness can be uncomfortable. It can feel like regret or anger, but it is actually clarity arriving late, not too late. You did what you needed to do to survive. Now you are being asked to live. A life that can no longer contain you will start to feel heavy. Not because it is demanding more from you, but because it is asking you to stay the same. And staying the same is no longer possible. You may notice that you feel restless even when nothing is happening. That silence feels charged rather than peaceful. That your imagination keeps wandering beyond the boundaries of your current circumstances. These are not distractions, they are previews. Your consciousness is testing the edges of the container. Eventually, a realization begins to form, not as a thought, but as a felt truth. If nothing changes, something inside you will wither. This is not a threat. It is information. Life is not meant to be endured. It is meant to be expressed. When your life can no longer contain you, it is not asking you to destroy everything you have built. It is asking you to let go of what has become too small. Some structures are meant to be temporary. Some identities are meant to be outgrown. Some chapters are meant to end quietly without drama or blame. But endings are difficult when the life you are leaving once saved you. You may feel loyalty to the person you were when you built this life. You may fear betraying them by wanting more now, but growth is not betrayal. It is continuation. You honor your past self not by staying frozen in their needs, but by allowing yourself to evolve. A life that can no longer contain you will start to feel like effort instead of flow, like maintenance instead of meaning, like repetition instead of discovery, and no amount of optimization will fix that. You cannot reorganize your way out of a life you have outgrown. You cannot productivity hack your way into alignment. At some point, the only solution is expansion. This expansion does not begin externally. It begins with permission. Permission to admit that you have changed. Permission to acknowledge that what once fit no longer does. Permission to imagine a life that feels spacious again. You do not need to know what comes next yet. You only need to stop pretending that this is enough. The discomfort you feel is not a verdict. It is an invitation. Your life has done its job. Now it is time to build one that can hold who you are becoming. Chapter 4. The collapse that looks like confusion. There is a phase in transformation that few people talk about honestly. It is not inspiring and it is not empowering. It does not feel like progress. It feels like confusion. Not ordinary confusion, but a deep internal disorientation. A sense that your usual way of thinking no longer works. That decisions feel heavier than they should. That clarity, once accessible, now seems distant. This phase is often misunderstood. It is labeled as losing direction, falling behind, or falling apart. But what is actually happening is something far more precise. Your old internal structure is collapsing, and collapse, when it is part of growth, rarely looks graceful. The mind likes continuity. It likes linear narratives. It wants one chapter to end cleanly before the next begins. But real transformation does not work that way. Instead, the old framework dissolves before the new one is fully formed. This creates a temporary void. In this void, familiar reference points disappear. Beliefs you relied on no longer feel true. Goals that once guided you lose their power. Even your sense of identity may feel unstable. You may ask yourself questions you never had to ask before. What do I actually want? What matters now? Who am I without these roles? These questions do not come with immediate answers, and the absence of answers can feel terrifying. The nervous system interprets this lack of orientation as danger. The mind tries to restore order by forcing conclusions, rushing decisions, or clinging to old narratives. But this only deepens the confusion, because this collapse is not asking you to think harder. It is asking you to stop relying on structures that no longer apply. Confusion in this context is not ignorance. It is unlearning. It is the mind losing access to outdated maps. When a building is being renovated, there is a phase where walls are removed, floors are exposed, and the space looks chaotic. From the outside, it appears broken, but the chaos is intentional. You cannot install new foundations on top of old ones. Your confusion is the sound of old assumptions breaking apart. You may notice that your attention becomes scattered, that you struggle to focus, that you feel mentally tired even when you are not doing much. This is not laziness, it is cognitive recalibration. Your system is reorganizing at a deep level. You may also notice emotional fluctuations, moments of hope followed by waves of doubt, brief clarity followed by fog. This oscillation is not a setback, and it is integration in motion. The mind is letting go of certainty while learning how to trust something new. During this phase, many people panic and try to get back to normal. They force productivity. They demand answers. They pressure themselves to figure it out, but there is no going back. The collapse has already begun because the old structure was no longer sustainable. Trying to rebuild it only prolongs the discomfort. This phase requires a different kind of intelligence. Not the intelligence of control, but the intelligence of patience. Confusion is not the opposite of clarity, it is the doorway to it. Every major internal shift passes through a period where nothing feels solid, where meaning dissolves before reforming, where identity loosens before reorganizing. You are not lost, you are between orientations. This is why advice from others often feels unhelpful right now. They are offering solutions from maps that no longer match your terrain. Your confusion is not a problem to be solved externally. It is a process unfolding internally. If you allow it, something remarkable happens. Gradually, beneath the confusion, a new coherence begins to emerge, not as a rigid plan, but as a quiet sense of direction, a subtle pull rather than a loud command. But this coherence cannot emerge if the space is not allowed. Think of muddy water. If you keep stirring it, it stays opaque. If you let it settle, clarity returns on its own. Your confusion needs stillness, not force. This does not mean passivity. It means listening differently. During this phase, your intuition begins to speak more softly but more accurately, not in full sentences but in sensations, a sense of yes or no without explanation, a pull towards certain ideas, places, or ways of being. The mind may distrust this. It wants proof. It wants guarantees. But intuition does not negotiate. It guides through resonance, not logic. The collapse that looks like confusion is actually a refinement process. Your system is shedding excess identities, outdated motivations, borrowed desires. What remains will be simpler but truer. You may grieve during this phase. Grieve the certainty you once had. Grieve the version of yourself that knew exactly what to do. This grief is valid, but it is also temporary. On the other side of this confusion is not chaos, but alignment. A clarity that does not need to be defended. A direction that does not require force. For now, your task is not to understand everything. It is to stay present while understanding reorganizes itself. The collapse is not the end, it is the clearing. And what grows in cleared ground is always more alive than what came before. Chapter 5. Signs you are spiritually outgrowing your environment. There is a moment when your environment begins to feel louder than it used to. Not in volume, but in friction. The rooms you enter seem heavier. The conversations feel repetitive before they even begin. The energy of certain places drains you in ways you cannot logically explain. Nothing obvious has changed. The people are the same. The routines are the same. The structures are intact. Yet something in you reacts differently. This is one of the clearest signs that you are spiritually outgrowing your environment. Spiritual outgrowing does not mean superiority. It does not mean you are more evolved, more awakened, or more enlightened than others. It simply means that your internal frequency has shifted, and the external world has not yet caught up. Every environment has an energetic signature. It is shaped by shared beliefs, unspoken agreements, emotional norms, and unconscious expectations. When your inner world resonates with that signature, you feel at ease. When it no longer does, friction appears. This friction is often subtle at first. You may feel unusually irritated by small things. You may feel impatient during conversations that once felt normal. You may find yourself withdrawing emotionally without intending to. This withdrawal is not rejection, it is self-regulation. Your system is conserving energy because it can no longer afford to leak itself into misalignment. One of the first signs of outgrowing an environment is heightened sensitivity. You notice tones, undercurrents, and dynamics you once overlooked. You feel the weight behind words. You sense what is not being said. This sensitivity can feel like a burden. You may wish you could go back to being less aware, but awareness does not reverse, it deepens. As awareness deepens, tolerance narrows. You may find that certain jokes no longer land. Certain values no longer feel negotiable. Certain compromises now feel like betrayals of your own integrity. This can be confusing because you may still care deeply about the people around you. Love does not disappear when alignment does, but resonance does. And resonance is what determines whether an environment nourishes or depletes you. Another sign you are outgrowing your environment is the urge to edit yourself. You notice yourself holding back insights, softening your language, downplaying your curiosity or depth to avoid discomfort. This self-editing is exhausting. It requires constant monitoring of your instincts, and over time it creates a sense of internal compression. You begin to feel smaller than you actually are, not because others are shrinking you intentionally, but because the environment does not have the capacity to receive your expansion. This is not a failure of the environment, it is a mismatch. Every environment is built to support a certain level of consciousness. When you exceed that level, friction is inevitable. You may also notice a loss of interest in activities that once defined your social life. Not because they are bad, but because they no longer feed you. The stimulation feels shallow, the pace feels frantic, the focus feels misdirected. You may crave quieter spaces, slower rhythms, deeper conversations. This craving is not isolation, it is recalibration. Your nervous system is seeking conditions that support integration rather than stimulation. Another sign is an internal resistance to certain expectations. You feel a subtle rebellion against what is considered normal or successful in your environment. Paths that others pursue enthusiastically leave you cold. This resistance is not laziness or defiance, it is discernment emerging. You are no longer motivated by external validation. You are being guided by internal coherence. This shift can feel destabilizing because it removes familiar motivators, approval, belonging, predictability. But it also opens access to something more stable, alignment. As you outgrow an environment, you may experience guilt. Guilt for wanting more, guilt for wanting different, guilt for feeling disconnected. This guilt often comes from confusing gratitude with obligation. You can be grateful for what an environment gave you without staying loyal to what it can no longer provide. Gratitude does not require stagnation. Another sign is the sense that you are living ahead of your circumstances. Your inner world feels richer, more complex, more alive than what surrounds you. You may feel unseen, not because others do not care, but because they cannot fully perceive where you are. This invisibility can feel painful, but it is temporary. You are between environments. Outgrowing an environment does not mean you immediately know where you belong next. It means you know where you no longer belong. This is an important distinction. Clarity often comes in two stages. First, clarity about what no longer fits, then later, clarity about what does. Trying to skip the first stage only delays the second. Your environment will continue to feel restrictive until you acknowledge the mismatch honestly. Not to judge it, not to escape it impulsively, but to stop denying your own growth. When you outgrow an environment, it begins to feel like wearing clothes that no longer fit. They may still be beautiful, they may still hold memories, but they restrict your movement. You are not wrong for needing more room. This phase asks for courage, but not dramatic action. It asks for internal honesty, to admit that you are changing, to stop forcing comfort where there is none, to begin listening to where your energy wants to go. You do not need to burn bridges. You do not need to explain yourself to everyone. You only need to stop pretending that staying the same is safe, because for you, it no longer is. Chapter 6. The Disappearing Motivation. One of the most unsettling experiences during a period of deep transition is the sudden disappearance of motivation. The drive that once propelled you forward seems to evaporate. The goals that once energized you now feel distant or meaningless. Tasks that used to feel purposeful now feel strangely empty. This can be frightening. Motivation is often mistaken for identity. When it disappears, people fear they are losing themselves. But this loss is not what it seems. Motivation does not disappear without reason. It dissolves when the structure it was supporting is no longer relevant. Much of what we call motivation is actually alignment with external expectations. It is fueled by reward systems that no longer resonate once consciousness shifts. When you begin to outgrow your old life, the engines that powered it shut down. Not to punish you, but to prevent you from investing energy into paths that no longer match who you are becoming. This is why forcing motivation during this phase rarely works. You can push yourself temporarily, but it feels hollow, unsustainable. The energy does not return because the internal contract has expired. You may try to reignite your drive through discipline, pressure, or comparison. You may tell yourself you are falling behind, that others are moving forward while you are stuck. But this comparison is misleading. You are not stalled, you are recalibrating. Motivation that disappears during transformation is often motivation that was borrowed rather than intrinsic. It was tied to proving something, becoming something, escaping something. When those unconscious drivers dissolve, there is a temporary vacuum. This vacuum is not emptiness, it is neutrality. Your system is waiting for a new reason to move, one that is not based on fear, approval, or survival. This waiting can feel uncomfortable because we are taught that momentum equals success, that slowing down is failure. But slowing down during transition is intelligent. It prevents misalignment. If your old motivation returned unchanged, you would rebuild the same life you are trying to outgrow. The absence of motivation creates space. Space to ask different questions, space to notice what genuinely interests you now, space to feel instead of chase. During this phase, restlessness often replaces motivation. You may feel unsettled but directionless, alert but unengaged. This is not apathy. It is anticipation without an object. Your energy is no longer available for goals that do not reflect your emerging self, but it has not yet attached to what comes next. This is why trying to define your next move too early feels forced. You are asking an outdated version of yourself to choose a future for someone new. That never works. The disappearing motivation is a protective mechanism. It prevents premature commitment. It keeps you from locking into paths that would require another painful exit later. This phase also reveals how much of your identity was tied to productivity. When you are no longer driven, you may feel worthless, invisible, unnecessary. These feelings are not truths. They are withdrawal symptoms from a system that equated output with value. As that system dissolves, you are asked to redefine worth, not based on achievement, but on authenticity. This is challenging because authenticity does not always come with applause. It comes with quiet clarity. You may feel unmotivated to explain yourself, unmotivated to compete, unmotivated to perform. This is not disengagement from life. It is disengagement from false incentives. Gradually, beneath the absence of motivation, something else begins to stir: curiosity. Not the restless curiosity of ambition, but a softer one, a wondering, a pull towards certain ideas, environments, or ways of being. This curiosity is fragile at first. It does not shout. It does not demand immediate action. It asks for patience. If you listen to it instead of forcing motivation, it grows. It becomes a different kind of drive, one that feels quieter but more sustainable. This new energy does not feel like pressure. It feels like alignment. But it cannot emerge if the old motivation is constantly being resuscitated. The disappearing motivation is not a dead end. It is a clearing, a pause between lives, a moment where your system says, "Not this anymore," and waits for something truer to answer. You are not lazy. You are not broken. You are not losing your edge. You are shedding incentives that no longer belong to you. What comes next will not require forcing. It will invite you. And when that invitation arrives, the energy you thought you lost will return, not as urgency, but as quiet certainty. That is how you know it is real. Chapter 7. When people start misunderstanding you. There is a particular kind of pain that arrives when you realize that the people who once understood you no longer seem to. Not because they have changed, but because you have. Your words land differently now. Your silences are misread. Your choices are questioned in ways they never were before. You notice it first in small moments. A joke that falls flat. An explanation that feels strangely inadequate. A look of confusion where there used to be recognition. At first, you assume it is a communication issue. You try to clarify. You offer more context. You soften your tone, adjust your language, and meet people where they are. But the misunderstanding persists. This is not because you are failing to explain yourself. It is because you are no longer speaking from the same internal framework. When you begin to outgrow your old life, your inner reference points shift. Your values reorganize. Your priorities realign. Your sense of meaning deepens. But the people around you are still responding to who you used to be. They are listening through old expectations, interpreting through outdated versions of you, projecting familiarity onto someone who no longer exists in the same way. This creates a subtle but persistent disconnect. You may feel as though you are constantly being misunderstood, not in dramatic ways, but in quiet, cumulative ones. Your intentions are questioned, your boundaries are interpreted as rejection. Your growth is mistaken for distance, arrogance, or withdrawal. This can be deeply destabilizing. We often rely on being understood as a form of grounding. When others reflect us accurately, we feel real, seen, anchored. When that reflection distorts, it can feel like losing your footing. You may begin to doubt yourself. Wonder if you are being unclear. Ask yourself whether you are overthinking, overreacting, or imagining the gap. But the gap is real. It is the space between who you are becoming and who others are prepared to see. Misunderstanding is not always a failure of empathy. Sometimes it is a limitation of context. People understand you through the version of you they know. When that version changes, their understanding lags behind. This is especially true when your growth disrupts unspoken agreements. You may no longer play the same role. You may no longer react the same way. You may no longer prioritize the same things. These shifts can feel threatening to those who relied on your consistency, so they interpret your change as something negative, distance, judgment, coldness, not because you are any of those things, but because change destabilizes the familiar. You may notice that conversations become more effortful, that you are asked to justify choices that feel obvious to you, that you are expected to explain shifts that you yourself are still integrating. This is exhausting, because you are not just growing, you are also translating. And translation requires energy. There may come a point where you realize that explaining yourself is costing more than it gives, that every explanation feels like a dilution of something true, that being fully understood by everyone is no longer possible or necessary. This realization can feel like grief. You grieve the ease you once had with certain people, the shared language, the effortless rapport. But grief is not regression. It is acknowledgement. You are mourning the end of a shared context, and that is allowed. One of the hardest lessons in growth is accepting that being misunderstood is sometimes the price of becoming more yourself. Not everyone will update their understanding of you. Not everyone will be curious about your evolution. Not everyone will want to meet you where you are now. This does not mean you must cut people off. It means you must stop requiring validation from places that can no longer provide it. When people misunderstand you during this phase, it is tempting to shrink back into old patterns for the sake of harmony, to become more palatable, more predictable, more familiar. But this only delays the inevitable. You cannot become smaller without harming yourself. Misunderstanding in this context is a rite of passage. It signals that you are no longer living solely for external coherence. You are aligning internally, even when it disrupts the image others have of you. This does not make you unkind, it makes you honest. There is also a quiet strength that emerges when you stop correcting every misinterpretation, when you allow others to hold their version of you without needing to manage it. This is not indifference, it is self-trust. You begin to understand that being accurately seen by everyone is not a requirement for living truthfully, that your inner compass matters more than external consensus. Over time, something shifts. Some people fall away naturally, not dramatically but gently. The connection loosens because it is no longer being sustained by alignment. Others surprise you. They lean in, they ask different questions, they adjust their lens, and some remain, but in a quieter, more distant way. All of this is part of the reorganization. You are not meant to be fully understood at every stage of your becoming. Some phases are private by nature. They require solitude, patience, and self-validation. When people start misunderstanding you, it is not a sign you are on the wrong path. It is often confirmation that you have left the old one. You are not here to be easily categorized. You are here to be real. And reality, especially in motion, rarely fits neatly into familiar boxes. Chapter 8. The Loneliness of Transition. There is a loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being in between versions of yourself, in between worlds, in between ways of living. This loneliness is quiet, pervasive, and difficult to explain. You may be surrounded by people and still feel it. You may be busy and still feel it. You may be loved and still feel it. Because this loneliness does not come from absence. It comes from misalignment. During periods of deep transition, your inner world shifts faster than your outer reality. You are no longer fully who you were, but you are not yet fully who you are becoming. This creates a liminal space, and liminal spaces are inherently lonely. You may notice that conversations no longer satisfy you, even when they are pleasant, that social interactions leave you feeling drained rather than nourished, that being around others feels strangely effortful. This does not mean you have become antisocial or detached. It means your system is recalibrating. You are integrating new layers of awareness, and integration often requires solitude. But solitude, when unexpected or prolonged, can feel like isolation. You may wonder if something is wrong with you, if you are withdrawing too much, if you are becoming disconnected. But this loneliness is not a symptom of dysfunction. It is a feature of transformation. When a caterpillar enters the cocoon, it does not remain the same creature waiting to emerge with wings. Its entire structure dissolves. There is a period where it is neither caterpillar nor butterfly. This in-between state is essential, and it is solitary. Human transformation follows a similar pattern. There are phases where you cannot fully relate to others because you are no longer anchored in your old identity, and you have not yet embodied the new one. You are between languages. You may feel as though no one quite gets where you are. Not because they are unwilling, but because this phase is experiential rather than conceptual. It cannot be explained fully. It must be lived. This can feel deeply lonely, especially in a culture that values constant connection, productivity, and visibility. You may feel pressure to stay socially engaged, to maintain appearances, to reassure others that you are fine, but inside you feel distant. Not from people, but from the version of yourself that knew how to participate easily. This loneliness often carries shame. You may judge yourself for not being more social, more enthusiastic, more present, but the truth is simpler. Your energy is being redirected inward. Transition requires internal focus. It requires listening, sensing, and waiting, and those are solitary acts. This loneliness is not a sign you are unsupported. It is a sign that your support is coming from a different place now. Instead of external validation, you are learning to sit with yourself. Instead of shared identity, you are discovering internal coherence. This is uncomfortable. Humans are wired for connection. We find safety in mirroring. We orient ourselves through others. So when that mirroring fades, even temporarily, it can feel disorienting. You may reach out and feel unseen. You may withdraw and feel guilty. You may oscillate between craving connection and needing space. This oscillation is normal. You are not meant to isolate completely, nor are you meant to force connection where there is none. You are learning a new balance, one where connection is chosen rather than habitual, one where solitude is nourishing rather than empty. Over time, you may notice that this loneliness has a different quality than loneliness you have known before. It is quieter, more spacious, less desperate. It does not demand distraction. It invites reflection. You may find yourself drawn to stillness, to long walks, to moments of silence. These are not escapes. They are incubators. Something is forming in this quiet. You may not know what it is yet, but you can feel its presence. The loneliness of transition is not permanent. It is transitional. As you integrate your new awareness, new forms of connection will emerge. Connections that meet you where you are now, not where you were. But these connections cannot appear until you fully inhabit this in-between space. You cannot rush this phase, you cannot bypass it. It is where you learn to be with yourself without distraction, where you develop trust in your own company, where you stop outsourcing your sense of belonging. This does not mean you will never feel lonely again. It means loneliness will no longer define you. You are not being abandoned, you are being prepared. Prepared to connect from a place of authenticity rather than habit, prepared to be seen without shrinking, prepared to belong without disappearing. The loneliness you feel now is not emptiness, it is space, and space is where new life forms. You are not alone in this. Even if it feels that way, you are simply between chapters, and this quiet, solitary page is necessary for the story that comes next. Chapter 9. Old Dreams Losing Their Pull. There is a moment in transformation that feels strangely anticlimactic. No dramatic breakdown, no sudden revelation, just a quiet realization that the dreams you once chased no longer call to you. They do not repel you, they simply fade. You think about the future you once wanted and feel nothing. No excitement, no hunger, no urgency. This can be deeply unsettling. We are taught to define ourselves by our dreams, to organize our lives around long-term goals, to measure progress by how closely we move toward what we once imagined. So when old dreams lose their pull, it can feel like losing direction altogether. But this loss is not emptiness, it is precision. Old dreams do not disappear randomly. They dissolve when the version of you who wanted them no longer exists. Many dreams are born from necessity rather than truth. They arise from survival needs, social conditioning, or unexamined beliefs about what will make us worthy, safe, or admired. These dreams serve an important function. They move us forward when we are still learning who we are, but they are not meant to last forever. As you grow, your inner landscape changes, your values deepen, your definition of fulfillment evolves, and suddenly, the dream that once felt like salvation feels irrelevant. You may feel confused by this indifference. You may ask yourself why you no longer care about what once mattered so deeply. You may worry that you have lost ambition, passion, or purpose. But what you have actually lost is attachment to an outdated future. This is not regression, it is refinement. Old dreams often dissolve quietly. You notice it when imagining success no longer excites you, when visualizing achievement feels flat, when the thought of making it brings relief rather than joy. This emotional neutrality is important. It signals that your system no longer sees fulfillment in that direction. Forcing yourself to keep chasing a dream that no longer resonates creates internal conflict. You may continue outwardly, but inwardly you disengage. This dissonance is exhausting. So your system begins to withdraw desire as a form of protection. Desire is energy. When it is no longer available, it means that energy is being conserved for something else. During this phase, you may feel unmoored. Without a clear dream, life can feel directionless. You may fear becoming stagnant or invisible, but this fear comes from equating purpose with ambition. Purpose does not always announce itself as a grand vision. Sometimes it arrives as a subtle reorientation. Old dreams often lose their pull before new ones appear. This gap is intentional. If a new dream arrived too quickly, it would simply replace the old one without allowing deeper questioning. This pause invites inquiry. Why did you want what you wanted? What did you believe it would give you? What needs were embedded in that dream? Recognition of these underlying needs is crucial. Perhaps the dream was never about the title, the money, or the achievement. Perhaps it was about freedom, expression, security, connection. When the dream dissolves, the need remains. And now it seeks a more honest expression. This is why new desires often feel vague at first. You sense a longing, but you cannot yet name it. This vagueness is not confusion, it is gestation. Your system is stripping away form to find essence. During this time, you may grieve your old dreams, not because they were wrong, but because they carried meaning at one time. You may feel sadness at letting go of a future you worked hard to envision. You may feel guilt for no longer wanting what others still admire. This grief is natural. Dreams are not just plans, they are identities. Letting go of an old dream means letting go of the person who needed it, and that deserves respect. But holding on to a dream past its expiration date keeps you tethered to a version of yourself that no longer exists. It keeps you rehearsing a future that cannot satisfy you. Old dreams lose their pull so that you can listen for something quieter but truer. This listening requires patience. It requires tolerating uncertainty without rushing to fill it. You may feel pressure to replace the old dream immediately, to declare a new goal, to appear motivated. But this pressure often comes from external expectations. Internally, something else is happening. Your sense of purpose is shifting from outcome-based to state-based, from achieving to being, from accumulation to alignment. This does not mean you will stop creating or contributing. It means creation will arise from coherence rather than hunger. When old dreams lose their pull, it is not because you have stopped dreaming. It is because you are learning to dream from a deeper place. One that does not require constant striving. One that does not depend on external validation. One that feels more like recognition than pursuit. This transition may feel empty at first, but emptiness is fertile. It is where new forms take shape. Do not rush to define your next dream. Let it find you. The dreams that come after this phase are not loud. They do not demand attention. They invite devotion. And when they arrive, you will recognize them not by excitement alone, but by peace. Chapter 10. The Nervous System Rewriting Itself. One of the least discussed aspects of personal transformation is what it does to the nervous system. Change is not only psychological, it is physiological. When your identity shifts, your body must recalibrate how it perceives safety, threat, and regulation. This process is subtle but profound. You may notice changes in your energy levels, your sleep patterns, your tolerance for stimulation. Things that once felt manageable may now feel overwhelming. Noise, crowds, schedules, even conversation. This sensitivity is often mistaken for weakness or burnout, but it is neither. Your nervous system is updating. For years, it learned how to survive within a specific set of conditions. It adapted to routines, environments, and expectations that defined your old life. As those structures dissolve, your nervous system no longer knows how to orient itself, so it becomes hyper-aware. This heightened sensitivity is not a flaw. It is a transitional state. Think of it as a system reboot. During this phase, your body may signal discomfort before your mind understands why. You may feel anxious without a clear cause, tired even when rested, restless without direction. This is not random. Your nervous system is shedding old patterns of vigilance and bracing. Patterns that once kept you safe may now be unnecessary or harmful. But letting go of them takes time. The body does not abandon learned survival strategies overnight. It releases them gradually. Often this release comes with physical sensations. Tension, shallow breathing, digestive changes, muscle fatigue. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of recalibration. Your system is learning new thresholds. It is redefining what safety feels like in a life that no longer revolves around constant striving or external validation. This can feel destabilizing because the old cues for safety are gone. Before, safety may have meant being busy, achieving, being needed, staying productive. Now those same behaviors may trigger stress rather than reassurance. Your nervous system is saying, this no longer works. This can lead to confusion. You may want to slow down, but feel guilty doing so. You may crave simplicity, but feel anxious without structure. You may oscillate between needing rest and needing movement. This oscillation is part of the rewiring. Your system is searching for a new baseline. During this phase, it is essential to listen to your body without judgment. Rest when you need to rest, withdraw when you need to withdraw. Simplify when complexity feels overwhelming. This is not avoidance, it is integration. Integration requires safety. Your nervous system must feel secure enough to let go of old defenses. And safety now comes from alignment rather than control. This may require redefining productivity, redefining success, redefining worth. Your body is learning that it does not need to be in constant motion to be valuable, that it can pause without falling behind, that stillness is not danger. This learning takes time. During this phase, practices that support regulation become essential. Not to fix yourself, but to support transition, gentle movement, quiet time, reduced stimulation. These are not luxuries, they are necessities. You may also notice emotional releases, sudden sadness, unexpected relief, moments of joy without cause. These emotions are stored energy being discharged. Your nervous system is clearing old residues. This clearing can feel intense, but it is temporary. As your system settles into its new baseline, something shifts. You feel calmer in ways you did not expect, more present, less reactive. Your tolerance for misalignment decreases, but your capacity for authenticity increases. This is the gift of a rewired nervous system. You are no longer driven primarily by fear or habit. You are guided by internal coherence. But this guidance emerges only after the system feels safe enough to trust itself. The rewiring phase cannot be rushed. It is not a problem to solve. It is a process to support. If you are experiencing heightened sensitivity, fatigue, or emotional flux, you are not breaking down. You are reorganizing. Your body is learning how to live in a life that is more honest, more spacious, and more aligned. This takes patience. But on the other side of this recalibration is a nervous system that is no longer braced against life. One that can respond rather than react. One that can rest without guilt. One that can move forward without force. This is not weakness, it is strength refined, and it is a necessary foundation for everything that comes next. Chapter 11. The strange pull toward stillness. At some point in the process of outgrowing your old life, something unexpected begins to happen. You start craving stillness. Not rest in the casual sense, not sleep as an escape, but a deeper quiet, an absence of noise, expectation, and stimulation. This pull can feel confusing, especially if you once thrived on momentum. If you were driven, productive, ambitious, or constantly engaged, stillness may feel unfamiliar, even threatening. You may wonder why you no longer want to fill your days, why solitude feels nourishing instead of lonely, why silence feels more attractive than conversation. This is not withdrawal from life, it is a reorientation within it. Stillness appears when your system is integrating something new. Before a seed breaks through soil, everything slows beneath the surface. Before a new structure stabilizes, movement pauses. Your consciousness is doing the same. The mind often resists this phase. It equates stillness with stagnation. It whispers that you are wasting time, falling behind, or losing relevance. But the pull towards stillness does not come from fear. It comes from intelligence. Your system understands that what is forming next cannot emerge in noise. During earlier phases of life, movement was necessary. Action created learning. Engagement built identity. Experience shaped direction. But now, movement without meaning feels draining. Your nervous system no longer wants constant input. It wants space to metabolize what you have already lived. This is why stillness feels restorative rather than boring. You may notice that you want to cancel plans. Spend more time alone. Reduce stimulation from screens, conversations, and obligations. This is not antisocial behavior, it is sensory discernment. You are learning what truly feeds you. Stillness allows you to hear what has been drowned out for years. Your intuition, your internal rhythms, your unedited reactions to life. In the absence of external noise, subtle truths surface. You may notice thoughts you have avoided, feelings you postponed, insights that do not fit neatly into your old narrative. This can be uncomfortable, which is why many people avoid stillness altogether. But you are being pulled toward it because you are ready. Stillness is where coherence forms. When life was about becoming, stillness felt optional. Now that life is about being, stillness is essential. You are not slowing down because you are tired of life. You are slowing down because you are tired of living unconsciously. This phase often arrives after prolonged effort. After years of striving, adapting, and performing, your system is no longer willing to be constantly shaped by external demands. It wants to listen inwardly. Stillness does not mean doing nothing. It means doing less of what is misaligned. It means choosing quality over quantity, depth over speed, presence over productivity. You may notice that your thoughts become clearer in quiet moments, that ideas arise spontaneously when you stop chasing them. That emotional clarity appears when you are no longer distracted. This is not coincidence. Stillness removes interference. It creates a clean signal. Many breakthroughs occur not in moments of action, but in moments of pause. This is why ancient wisdom traditions valued retreat, silence, and contemplation. not as escapes from life, but as ways of re-entering it more truthfully. Stillness allows your internal systems to synchronize. Mind, body, emotion, and intuition. When these systems are constantly pulled in different directions, you feel fragmented. Stillness restores coherence. You may also notice that your tolerance for superficial interaction decreases. Small talk feels exhausting. Performative conversations feel hollow. This does not mean you are becoming judgmental. It means your energy is becoming selective. You are conserving it for what matters. Stillness teaches you that you do not need to be constantly available to be valuable, that your worth is not measured by output or responsiveness. This lesson can feel radical, especially if your identity was built around usefulness, productivity, or caretaking. But this phase is teaching you a deeper truth. Your presence matters more than your performance. In stillness, you begin to feel your own rhythm again, not the rhythm imposed by schedules, expectations, or urgency, but the one that feels natural to you now. This rhythm may be slower, more spacious, more intentional, and it will guide you more accurately than any external plan. The pull towards stillness is not permanent in the sense of isolation. It is temporary in function. It is preparing you. Stillness is the incubation chamber of your next life. If you honor it, something new will emerge. Not forced, not rushed, but aligned. Resist the urge to pathologize this phase. You are not depressed because you want quiet. You are not disengaged because you want space. You are listening, and listening is an active state, one that requires courage in a world addicted to noise. Let stillness do its work. It is not asking you to disappear. It is asking you to arrive more fully. Chapter 12. The Fear That Appears Without a Name. At some point amid the quiet, another presence emerges. Fear. Not the sharp, obvious kind that points to a clear threat, but a formless, ambient fear that seems to exist without explanation. You may wake up with it, carry it through the day, feel it humming beneath ordinary moments. It does not say what it wants. It does not announce what it is protecting you from. It simply exists. This kind of fear is unsettling because it cannot be reasoned with. There is no clear problem to solve, no danger to avoid, and yet it feels real. Many people try to eliminate this fear as quickly as possible. They distract themselves, they seek reassurance, they assume something is wrong. But this fear is not a warning of external danger. It is the echo of an internal shift. This fear arises when identity begins to dissolve. Not completely, but enough that the old sense of self no longer feels solid. The mind interprets this dissolution as a threat. After all, the mind's primary function is continuity. It wants a stable story, a consistent identity, a predictable future. When those things begin to loosen, the mind sounds the alarm. Fear appears not because something bad is happening, but because something unfamiliar is. You are entering psychological territory where old definitions no longer apply. Who you were is no longer accurate. Who you are becoming is not yet clear. This in-between state has no labels, and the mind does not like unlabeled spaces. So it generates fear, not because it knows what to fear, but because it does not know who it is without the old structure. This is existential fear, not fear of an event, but fear of dissolution. It often shows up as vague anxiety, a sense of impending change, a feeling that something is coming without knowing what. You may try to attach this fear to something concrete, your job, your relationships, your health. But no matter what you focus on, the fear does not fully resolve. Because the source is not external. The source is transition. You are crossing a threshold where identity is reorganizing. The fear is not telling you to turn back. It is signaling that you are leaving familiar territory. In ancient initiation rites, this phase was expected. The initiate would enter the unknown without a map, stripped of old titles and roles. Fear was not seen as failure. It was seen as confirmation that transformation was underway. In modern life, we lack context for this experience, so we pathologize it. We call it anxiety. We assume something is broken, but this fear is often a sign that something false is falling away. It is the fear of the ego realizing it cannot come with you in its old form. The ego does not disappear, but it does transform, and transformation feels like death to the structures that resist it. This is why the fear feels irrational. There is no threat to your physical safety. But there is a threat to the old identity. The mind does not differentiate. It reacts anyway. During this phase, reassurance rarely helps. Logic does not soothe it. Planning does not quiet it. Because the fear is not asking for certainty, it is asking for trust. Trust in a process you cannot fully see. Trust in a self that is still forming. Trust in life without the familiar armor of identity. This is why grounding practices become important. Not to suppress fear, but to stay present with it. The fear does not want to be eliminated. It wants to be witnessed. When you sit with it without trying to fix it, something shifts. You realize it does not escalate endlessly, and it rises and it peaks and it falls like a wave. This teaches your nervous system that the unknown is survivable. That uncertainty is not fatal, that you can exist without a fully formed narrative. Over time, the fear loses its grip. Not because you conquered it, but because you stopped resisting it. You allowed it to move through you instead of defining you. This is a profound initiation. Most people never experience this consciously. They rush to rebuild identity before it dissolves, but you are staying, and staying changes you. On the other side of this unnamed fear is a quieter confidence, not bravado, not certainty, but trust. Trust in your ability to navigate without constant clarity. Trust in your internal guidance, trust in life's intelligence. This trust does not arrive all at once. It grows gradually, through repeated encounters with the unknown that do not destroy you. Eventually, the fear transforms. It becomes alertness instead of anxiety, curiosity instead of dread, presence instead of panic. You learn that you do not need to know everything to be okay. You learn that identity can be fluid without being lost. You learn that the ground beneath you is not as fragile as the mind insists. The fear that appeared without a name was never an enemy. It was a threshold guardian, and you are learning how to pass through it. Not by fighting, but by allowing yourself to become someone who no longer needs to be afraid of not knowing who they are. Because you are discovering something deeper. You are not the identity that is dissolving. You are the awareness watching it transform. And that awareness is far more stable than anything it leaves behind. Chapter 13. When Logic Can No Longer Lead. There comes a moment in deep transition when logic quietly steps aside. Not because logic has failed you, not because reasoning is wrong, but because the terrain you are entering cannot be navigated by maps you used before. You notice it when your usual problem-solving skills stop working, when pros and cons blur together, when every option seems equally reasonable or equally empty. You may sit with decisions that once would have been simple and feel inexplicably stuck, not paralyzed by fear, but unmoved by analysis. This is disorienting, especially if you have relied on your intellect to survive, succeed, or make sense of the world. Logic has always been your compass. It helped you choose wisely, avoid mistakes, stay safe, so when it no longer offers clarity, the mind panics. It assumes something is wrong. But this phase does not mean you are losing discernment. It means discernment is shifting to a deeper layer. Logic works best in stable systems, in predictable environments, in worlds where the variables are known. But you are no longer operating within a familiar system. Your values are changing. Your nervous system is recalibrating. Your identity is reorganizing. You are no longer choosing between known options. You are choosing between versions of yourself. And logic cannot evaluate futures that do not yet exist. At this stage, you may notice that thinking harder brings diminishing returns. You analyze and reanalyze, yet nothing clicks. The more you try to force certainty, the further it recedes. This is not indecision. It is a refusal to commit prematurely. Your system is protecting you from building your next life using outdated criteria. Logic can only work with what it already knows. But your next chapter requires you to move toward what you do not yet fully understand. This is where intuition begins to surface. Not as a loud voice, not as a dramatic revelation, but as subtle signals, a sense of heaviness when you imagine one path, a quiet openness when you imagine another, a bodily response that precedes explanation. At first, these signals feel unreliable, too vague, too subjective. The mind distrusts them because they cannot be justified. But intuition is not illogical, it is pre-logical. It processes information faster than conscious thought. It integrates emotion, memory, pattern recognition, and bodily intelligence. You have always used it. When meeting someone and instantly sensing trust or unease, when walking into a room and feeling its tone before anyone speaks. When knowing something was off long before you could explain why. Now, intuition is being asked to take the lead. This feels risky because intuition does not guarantee outcomes. It does not promise success. It does not provide step-by-step plans. It offers alignment, not certainty. The shift from logic to intuition is not a rejection of intelligence. It is an expansion of it. You are being asked to trust a wider bandwidth of information. During this phase, advice from others often feels misaligned. Even well-meaning guidance lands flat. Their logic belongs to a different context. You may notice that explanations exhaust you, that you no longer want to justify your choices. That saying "I just know" feels more honest than any rational argument. This honesty can be uncomfortable. It exposes you to misunderstanding. It requires self-trust. But self-trust is exactly what this phase is cultivating. When logic can no longer lead, it is because you are crossing into territory where alignment matters more than optimization. This is where many people turn back. They override intuition with reason. They choose the familiar path because it is defensible, explainable, approved. But doing so often creates regret, not immediately, but quietly, because something inside knew better. You are being given the opportunity to listen. This does not mean abandoning responsibility or foresight. It means allowing logic to support intuition rather than dominate it. You gather information, you consider implications, then you pause, and you notice how your body responds. Not how it reacts in fear, but how it settles or tightens. This is the intelligence that cannot be taught, only remembered. As you practice listening to this deeper guidance, confidence returns, not as certainty about outcomes, but as trust in process. You begin to feel less pressure to get it right, more openness to discovery. This is a different way of moving through life. One that feels slower at first, less impressive, but far more accurate. When logic can no longer lead, it is because you are being invited into a more embodied form of knowing. One that does not separate thought from feeling. One that honors timing over speed. One that allows life to meet you halfway. This is not a step backward. It is the moment you stop outsourcing authority to your mind alone and begin listening to the intelligence that has been guiding you quietly all along. Chapter 14. The subtle endings no one notices. Not all endings announce themselves. Some arrive quietly, without conflict, without closure, without witnesses. They slip into your life disguised as indifference, distance, or gentle disinterest. These are the endings that go unnoticed by the world. But they change everything. You may not remember the exact moment it happened, only that one day you realized something was already over. A relationship you no longer invest in, a habit that no longer tempts you, a version of yourself that no longer responds the same way. These endings are subtle because they are internal. Nothing dramatic happens on the outside. There is no argument, no decision, no declaration. Just a quiet withdrawal of energy. You stop reaching, stop reacting, stop trying, and one day you notice the effort is gone. This is how most real transformations occur. They do not end with fireworks. They end with silence. The mind often struggles to recognize these endings because they do not fit the narrative of closure we are taught to expect. We expect endings to be decisive, to involve confrontation or clarity. But many endings happen when alignment simply dissolves. You no longer resonate with something, and so you naturally release it. This can feel anticlimactic, even confusing. You may wonder if you should feel more, sadness, relief, anger, but instead you feel neutral. This neutrality is not numbness, it is completion. The lesson has integrated. The chapter has closed. One of the hardest parts of subtle endings is that others may not realize they are happening. They may continue relating to you as if nothing has changed, expecting the same engagement, the same availability, the same version of you. But internally, something has shifted. You are no longer invested in maintaining the old dynamic. This can create tension, not because you are doing anything wrong, but because endings that are not acknowledged still create distance. You may feel guilty for this distance. as though you owe an explanation. But many subtle endings cannot be explained without forcing meaning where there is none. They are not choices in the traditional sense. They are natural conclusions, like leaves falling when the season changes. No one announces it. The tree does not apologize, and it simply lets go. You may notice these endings in small behaviors. You stop checking your phone for certain messages. You no longer rehearse conversations in your head. You stop trying to be understood in certain spaces. These are signs of disengagement, not from life, but from misalignment. Subtle endings often precede visible change by a long time. Externally, nothing may shift for months or years. But internally, the attachment is gone. This internal shift is powerful. It frees energy, attention, emotional bandwidth. But because it happens quietly, it is rarely celebrated. You may even minimize it yourself. Assume it does not count because it did not hurt enough. But pain is not the measure of significance. Completion is. Another aspect of subtle endings is that they do not always involve rejection. Sometimes love remains, respect remains, history remains, but resonance does not. You can appreciate what something gave you without continuing to give yourself to it. This distinction is important. Subtle endings teach you that loyalty to growth sometimes means releasing what once mattered deeply. Not with bitterness, not with blame, but with gratitude and honesty. You may also notice that as these endings occur, space opens. Not immediately filled, just open. This space can feel strange. You are not used to having it. You may feel restless, as though something is missing. But what is missing is not the thing you released. It is the habit of filling every space. This openness is intentional. It is making room. Subtle endings clear the ground for what has not yet arrived. They are acts of trust. Trust that you do not need to cling to what is complete. Trust that life will respond to the space you create. Not all endings require ceremony. Some require only recognition. A quiet acknowledgement that something has run its course. When you allow these endings without forcing explanation, you move through transition with grace. You do not drag the past forward unnecessarily. You do not reopen doors that have closed naturally. You honor the rhythm of your own evolution. These endings are not losses, they are releases. And release is what allows movement. As you continue to outgrow your old life, more subtle endings will occur. Roles will loosen, identities will fade, attachments will soften, each one making you lighter, each one preparing you for the next phase. You do not need to announce these endings. You do not need permission. You only need to notice them, because what you notice you can honor, and what you honor you can release without regret. This is how you move forward without force, by allowing what is already complete to end quietly, so that what is becoming can finally begin. Chapter 15. The Identity That Starts to Crumble. There comes a point in deep transformation when the question is no longer what am I changing, but who am I without what is changing. This is the moment when identity begins to loosen. Not dramatically, not all at once, but subtly, persistently, unmistakably. The labels you once used to describe yourself no longer feel accurate. The roles you once inhabited effortlessly now feel heavy. The stories you told about who you are start to feel rehearsed, outdated, or incomplete. This is not confusion about personality. It is disidentification. For most of your life, your identity was constructed through necessity. You learned who to be based on what was required to survive, belong, and succeed. You adapted. You shaped yourself to fit contexts. You became reliable, capable, understandable. That identity was not false, it was functional. But identity built for survival eventually reaches its limit. When you begin to outgrow your old life, the identity that sustained it can no longer carry you forward. And so, it begins to crack. You may notice this when familiar descriptions feel hollow. When someone asks, "What do you do?" and the answer feels strangely irrelevant. When achievements that once defined you no longer bring a sense of self. This can feel deeply unsettling. Identity provides orientation. It tells you how to behave, what to expect, and where you belong. When it starts to crumble, the ground feels unstable. You may feel exposed, undefined, invisible. But what is actually dissolving is not you. It is the structure that once held you. This phase often brings grief. Not always obvious grief, but a quiet mourning for the person you have been. the one who knew how to navigate the world with confidence, the one who understood the rules. You may miss the clarity of that self, the certainty, the ease of knowing where you fit. But that self was built for a different chapter. Trying to carry it forward would require shrinking yourself again. Identity crumbling does not mean you are losing yourself. It means you are shedding what you are no longer limited to. This process is rarely linear. Some days, the old identity reasserts itself. You slip back into familiar patterns, speak from old scripts, react the way you always have. Then suddenly, it feels wrong. Like wearing a costume you have outgrown, these moments are not failures, they are confirmations. They show you that the old structure no longer fits. You may also notice discomfort around how others see you. Their expectations feel constraining. Their assumptions feel inaccurate. This can create a strong urge to explain yourself, to correct the image, to redefine yourself out loud. But explanations often fall short, because you are in transition, not conclusion. There is nothing stable yet to explain. The identity that is forming cannot be rushed into language. It must be lived into existence. This is why this phase feels vulnerable. Without a solid identity, you may feel unsure how to act, what to prioritize, how to introduce yourself to the world. But this vulnerability is not weakness. It is openness. Identity that is too rigid cannot evolve. Identity that loosens becomes adaptable. You are entering a phase where identity is no longer something you perform. It becomes something you inhabit, less defined by roles, more defined by presence. This shift often brings a deep fatigue. Holding up an identity requires energy, especially one that is no longer aligned. As it crumbles, you may feel tired not because you are doing too much, but because you have been holding on for too long. Letting go is exhausting at first, but it creates space. In that space, you may discover parts of yourself that were never allowed to surface. Preferences you ignored, values you downplayed, instincts you muted. These parts do not arrive with fanfare. They emerge quietly. You may notice yourself choosing differently without justification, speaking more honestly without explanation, saying no without guilt. These are signs of identity reformation, not built on labels but on integrity. You are learning who you are by noticing what you can no longer pretend to be. This is not an identity crisis. It is an identity shedding. Crisis implies something is wrong. Shedding implies something is complete. The self that is dissolving did its job. It protected you. It guided you. Now it is stepping aside. You do not need to rush to replace it. Identity rebuilt too quickly is often borrowed. Let the space remain open. Let yourself be undefined for a while. This undefined phase is where authenticity grows, not the curated kind, the lived kind. You are not losing your identity. You are loosening your grip on what you thought it had to be. And what emerges will not need constant reinforcement. It will feel natural, stable, quietly true. Chapter 16. The Return of Old Patterns, One Last Time. Just when you think you have moved past your old life, something unexpected happens. It returns, not fully, not permanently, but unmistakably. Old patterns resurface, old habits reappear, old dynamics knock at the door. This can feel discouraging. You may wonder if all your growth was an illusion, if you have regressed, if nothing truly changed. But this return is not a failure. It is a final integration. Transformation does not erase the past. It metabolizes it. And before something is fully released, it often revisits one last time. This return may show up in relationships. People from your past re-enter your life unexpectedly. Old conversations resurface. Familiar conflicts arise, or it may show up internally. Old fears reappear. Old coping mechanisms tempt you. Old self-talk resurfaces. The difference is subtle but crucial. This time, you see it clearly. The pattern does not have the same power. The reaction does not fully hook you. The old way feels familiar, but no longer inevitable. This is how you know you have changed. If the pattern still controlled you, you would not notice it. You would simply repeat it. Awareness is evidence of integration. The return of old patterns is like a final exam, not to test your perfection, but to show you your progress. Life offers you the same stimulus to see if the response has changed, and often it has. You may still feel the impulse, but you no longer act on it automatically. You pause, you choose differently, even if the choice feels awkward or uncertain. It is new. This pause is everything. It marks the shift from unconscious repetition to conscious response. Old patterns return because they want closure, not dramatic closure, energetic closure. They return so you can meet them with the awareness you did not have before. So you can say, internally, I see you now, and in seeing them, you free yourself. This phase can be emotionally complex. You may feel tempted to fall back into comfort. The old patterns are known, predictable. They offer relief from uncertainty, but they also come with a cost you now recognize. This awareness makes the choice clearer, even if it is not easier. You may also notice grief during this phase. Grief for how long you lived inside these patterns, for what they cost you, for the versions of yourself that were shaped by them. This grief is part of release. You are acknowledging the impact without staying bound to it. The return of old patterns also serves another purpose. It helps you integrate compassion for yourself. You see that these patterns were not flaws, they were strategies. They protected you, helped you cope, kept you safe in earlier contexts. You no longer need them, but you do not need to reject them either. You can thank them and let them go. This is why this return often feels gentler than expected. There is less shame, less urgency, more understanding. You are no longer at war with yourself. You are completing a cycle. After this phase, the patterns lose their charge. They may still exist in memory, but they no longer pull you. The emotional hook dissolves. This is true release, not suppression, not avoidance. Integration. The past no longer defines your reactions, it informs your wisdom. You carry the lesson without carrying the behavior. This is maturity, not in the social sense, but in the psychological one. You have lived something fully enough to move beyond it. The return of old patterns one last time is not a step backward. It is the final stitch. It closes the loop. After this, the path forward feels different, lighter, more open. Not because life is easier, but because you are no longer dragging unresolved cycles behind you. You are not erasing who you were. You are absorbing the knowledge and leaving the repetition behind. And once this integration is complete, the next phase begins. Not with force, not with urgency, but with a quiet readiness. You are no longer reacting to the past. You are available to the future. And that changes everything. Chapter 17. The Space Between Lives. There is a place you arrive at that does not feel like arrival at all. It feels like suspension, not the chaos of collapse, not the clarity of emergence, but a vast, quiet in-between where the old life has released you and the new one has not yet claimed you. This is the space between lives. It is one of the least understood phases of transformation because it offers nothing to grasp. No identity to wear, no direction to commit to, no certainty to anchor into, only space. For many, this space feels unbearable at first. The mind scrambles to escape it, to label it, to rush through it. But this space is not empty. It is fertile. In the space between lives, the structures that once organized your reality have dissolved. Your routines no longer dictate your days. Your motivations no longer propel you forward. Your identity no longer tells you who to be. You may wake up and feel unmoored. Not lost exactly, just unassigned. This can feel frightening in a world that equates purpose with productivity. You may feel like you are wasting time, like you should be doing something, like this pause needs justification. But this space is not a pause in the way the mind understands it. It is a recalibration chamber. Before a new life can form, the old one must fully let go, not just externally, but internally. And that letting go creates space. You are no longer who you were, but you are not yet who you are becoming, and in this gap, there is nothing to perform. This can feel like invisibility. Others may not know how to relate to you. You may not know how to present yourself. You may feel as though you have stepped outside the timeline everyone else is following. This is accurate. You are no longer living by inherited momentum. You are waiting for alignment to catch up with awareness. In ancient traditions, this phase was protected. Initiates were removed from society, given time without roles or responsibilities, allowed to dissolve before re-emerging. In modern life, we are rarely given permission for this. So the space between lives often feels like failure, but it is not failure. It is unstructured becoming. During this phase, you may feel a strange combination of relief and anxiety. Relief that the old pressures are gone. Anxiety because nothing has replaced them. This tension is normal. The mind wants closure, the soul wants space, and the soul always wins eventually. In this space, you may feel called to do very little. To walk without destination. To read without purpose. To think without conclusion. These are not indulgences, they are recalibrations of attention. You are learning how to exist without being pulled forward by obligation or backward by identity. This is a rare state. Most people avoid it by filling the space too quickly. They jump into new roles, new relationships, new goals, not because they are ready, but because the space feels intolerable. But you are staying, and staying changes you. In the space between lives, you begin to notice subtle truths. What genuinely calms you, what quietly excites you, what drains you without obvious reason. Without the noise of a structured life, these signals become clear. You may also notice grief surfacing unexpectedly. Grief without a clear object. This grief is for the life you are no longer living, even if it was painful, even if you chose to leave it. Grief does not mean regret, it means completion. You are honoring the passage. You may also feel boredom, not the restless boredom of understimulation, but a deeper boredom with the old ways of engaging with life. This boredom is a sign that novelty must now come from depth rather than activity. You are no longer satisfied by distraction. You want meaning, but meaning cannot be forced. It emerges when the system is ready. The space between lives teaches patience at a cellular level. Not patience as restraint, but patience as trust. Trust that something is forming even when you cannot see it. Trust that this space has intelligence. Trust that you are not falling behind. You may worry that if you stay here too long, you will lose momentum, that life will pass you by. But this space is not outside of life, and it is life reorganizing itself around truth rather than habit. Nothing that is meant for you will miss you here. This space also dismantles false urgency. You learn that not everything requires immediate response, that clarity has its own timing, that forcing direction creates distortion. This learning is subtle but permanent. Once you have lived in the space between lives, you no longer fear emptiness the same way. You understand that emptiness is not absence, it is availability. Availability for something that has not yet had room to exist. The space between lives is not where you stay forever. It is where you are remade, quietly, gently, without performance. If you honor this space, the next life does not arrive as a shock. It arrives as recognition. You do not have to search for it. You will feel it settling around you, like clothes that finally fit, like breath after holding too long, like home without effort. But first, there must be space, and you are in it now. Chapter 18. Why Forcing Clarity Delays It. When you are in the space between lives, one impulse becomes almost irresistible. The urge to figure it out, to name the next step, to define the future, to collapse uncertainty into certainty as quickly as possible. This urge is understandable. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. It leaves the mind without a job. It exposes you to vulnerability without protection. So the mind tries to help. It starts asking questions relentlessly. What should I do next? Where am I going? What is my purpose now? These questions seem reasonable, responsible even, but at this stage they are premature. Because clarity does not arrive through interrogation. It arrives through alignment. When you force clarity, you are asking an unfinished version of yourself to make permanent decisions. That is why clarity resists. Not because it is withholding, but because it is not ready to be claimed. You may notice this pattern. You sit down determined to figure out your future. You journal, you plan, you analyze, and the more you think, the more unclear you become. This is not because you lack insight. It is because thinking is no longer the correct tool. Clarity is not a product of effort during this phase. It is a byproduct of integration. Your system is still reorganizing. Values are settling. Identity is reforming. The nervous system is finding a new baseline. Clarity cannot land on unstable ground. Forcing it is like trying to build a house while the foundation is still shifting. You may build something impressive, but it will not last. This is why clarity you force feels brittle. It requires constant reassurance. It collapses under pressure. It creates anxiety rather than confidence. True clarity feels different, and it is quiet, unarguable, stable, and it arrives without effort. The mind, however, is not patient. It believes clarity is something you produce. But clarity is something you receive when you are ready. This readiness is not about intelligence or discipline, it is about coherence. When your inner systems align, mind, body, emotion, intuition, clarity emerges naturally. Until then, forcing it only creates noise. This is why answers during this phase feel slippery. You grasp one, and it dissolves. You choose a direction, and it feels wrong the next day. This instability is not a sign of failure. It is feedback. Your system is saying, not yet. Forcing clarity often comes from fear. Fear of wasting time, fear of appearing lost, fear of falling behind. But these fears are based on an outdated model of progress. Progress is not linear here. It is organic. Seeds do not sprout because they are pressured. They sprout when conditions are right. Your job is not to pull the plant out of the soil to check its growth. Your job is to tend the conditions. Rest, honesty, presence, stillness. These are not passive states. They are active forms of trust. When you stop forcing clarity, something unexpected happens. You begin to notice small, consistent signals. Not grand visions, but gentle pulls. Interests that linger, ideas that return, environments that feel lighter. These signals do not demand immediate action. They invite attention. Clarity grows from attention, not urgency. As you follow what feels quietly right, without needing to explain or justify, a direction begins to form, not as a rigid plan, but as a trajectory. You feel yourself moving again, not because you decided to, but because movement feels natural. This is aligned clarity. It does not shout. It does not require validation. It does not need to be defended. It feels inevitable, but it only arrives when you stop chasing it. This is the paradox. The more you trust the process, the faster it unfolds. The more you surrender the need to know, the clearer knowing becomes. Forcing clarity delays it because it interrupts integration. It pulls you back into mental control when the system is asking for embodied trust. This does not mean you stop engaging with life. It means you engage differently. You respond instead of plan. You listen instead of decide. You notice instead of predict. Over time, clarity crystallizes, not as a single answer, but as a lived direction. You look back and realize you have been moving all along, just not in the way you expected. Clarity does not arrive as a solution. It arrives as alignment. And alignment cannot be rushed. It must be allowed. If you are in this phase, give yourself permission to not know yet. Not knowing is not a flaw. It is a function. It is the space where something truer is forming. And when clarity does come, it will not feel like relief from confusion. It will feel like recognition. As if you are finally seeing what was quietly assembling beneath the surface all along. Chapter 19. The Emergence of New Desires. New desires do not arrive the way the old ones did. They do not announce themselves loudly. They do not come with urgency, obsession, or a burning need to chase. They appear quietly, almost shyly, as if unsure whether they are allowed to exist yet. You may notice them as faint curiosities, passing interests, moments of unexpected aliveness when you encounter certain ideas, places, or ways of being. At first, you might dismiss them. They feel too small, too impractical, too undefined. They do not look like the ambitions you were taught to recognize as meaningful. But these new desires are different by design. They are not born from lack. They are born from alignment. Old desires were often fueled by tension, a need to prove, a need to escape, a need to become something other than what you were. New desires arise from coherence. They do not try to fix you. They express you. This is why they feel fragile at first, and they are not reinforced by external validation. They are not supported by familiar narratives of success. They exist quietly, asking only for acknowledgement. You may notice that these desires do not demand immediate action. They are content to linger, to revisit you gently, to wait until you are ready. This waiting is not hesitation. It is intelligence. Your system knows that acting too quickly would force these desires into old frameworks, and old frameworks would distort them, so they remain subtle. You may feel drawn to things you cannot fully explain. A different pace of life, a different way of working, a different relationship to time, creativity, or connection. These desires often feel less impressive than your old dreams, less visible, less ambitious, but they feel truer. You may also notice that these desires do not come with a clear image of achievement. There is no final destination, no clear milestone. Instead, there is a quality of experience you long for: ease, depth, presence, integrity. This shift from outcome-based desire to state-based desire is significant. It signals that you are no longer motivated by external markers of worth. You are motivated by internal coherence. New desires ask different questions, not how far can I go, but how honestly can I live? They are less about accumulation and more about expression. This can feel disorienting because society does not offer many models for these desires. They are not easily packaged. They are not easily explained. You may feel reluctant to share them. Not because you are ashamed, but because they feel too tender, like seedlings that need protection before exposure. These desires also challenge your old definitions of success. You may want a life that feels spacious rather than impressive, meaningful rather than busy, sustainable rather than relentless. This can feel like a loss of ambition, but it is not. It is a refinement of ambition. You are no longer driven by comparison. You are driven by congruence. New desires often ask you to slow down, to simplify, to choose quality over quantity. This can create internal conflict if part of you still believes that growth must look like expansion in the external sense. But growth now is internal. It is about depth, not reach. You may notice that these desires feel calming rather than activating. They bring a sense of relief rather than urgency. This is how you know they are real. True desire does not agitate, it aligns. As these desires emerge, you may feel uncertain about how to honor them. They do not fit neatly into your current life. They may require changes you are not ready to make yet. This uncertainty is part of the process. New desires are not instructions, they are invitations. They invite you to pay attention, to notice what lights you up quietly, to observe what drains you without drama. Over time, as you listen, these desires become clearer, not through force, but through familiarity. You begin to recognize their tone, their rhythm, their direction. They do not push you forward, they pull you inward. This inward pull is not withdrawal from the world, it is alignment with yourself. As you honor these desires, even in small ways, something shifts. Your energy returns, not explosively but steadily. You feel more present or more grounded, more at home in your own life. New desires do not demand that you abandon everything at once. They ask for honesty in increments. A different choice here, a boundary there, a pause where you used to push. These small adjustments accumulate. They reshape your life from the inside out. Eventually, what once felt vague becomes tangible. What once felt fragile becomes stable. What once felt impossible becomes natural. New desires are not meant to replace old dreams immediately. They are meant to reorient you toward a life that feels like yours. Trust their quietness. It is not weakness, it is wisdom. Chapter 20. The silent rewriting of your standards. At some point, without fanfare or announcement, your standards begin to change. Not the standards you speak about, the ones you live by. You do not decide to raise them. You do not declare new boundaries. You simply stop tolerating what no longer aligns. This shift happens quietly. You notice it when you no longer engage in certain conversations, when you no longer justify certain behaviors, when you no longer explain why something does not feel right. You simply move away. This is not avoidance. It is discernment. Your standards are being rewritten from the inside. Old standards were often shaped by necessity, what you could tolerate to survive, what you accepted to belong, what you endured to move forward. New standards are shaped by self-respect. They are not rigid rules. They are embodied truths. You may notice that your tolerance for chaos decreases, for inconsistency, for emotional labor that goes unreciprocated. This does not make you demanding. It makes you honest. You are no longer willing to negotiate your nervous system for convenience. This rewriting is silent because it does not need validation. You do not announce your boundaries. You simply live them. You may stop responding as quickly, stop explaining yourself, stop making yourself available in ways that cost you. These changes may confuse others. They may ask what changed. They may assume you are distant or different, and you are. But not in the way they think. You are no longer operating from obligation. You are operating from alignment. Your standards are no longer aspirational. They are operational. They guide your choices automatically. You may notice that you leave situations sooner, not dramatically, but decisively. You no longer linger where your energy drops. You no longer stay to prove endurance. This is not selfishness, it is stewardship. You are protecting something valuable, your time, your energy, your presence. The silent rewriting of standards often includes relationships. You may realize that certain dynamics no longer work, not because they are toxic, but because they are incomplete. You may crave reciprocity where you once accepted imbalance, clarity where you once tolerated confusion, consistency where you once endured unpredictability. This does not mean you expect perfection, it means you expect coherence. Your standards become less about behavior and more about energy. How does this feel in my body? Does this expand or contract me? Does this support who I am becoming? These questions replace old metrics of success. You may also notice a shift in what you consider acceptable effort. You no longer push through exhaustion to meet external expectations. You no longer sacrifice rest for recognition. This is not laziness, it is sustainability. Your body has become part of the decision-making process. The rewriting of standards also affects how you speak to yourself. You no longer tolerate internal narratives that diminish you. You notice self-criticism faster, and you interrupt it more gently. This internal boundary setting is foundational because how you treat yourself sets the tone for how others treat you. As your standards shift internally, your external world responds, not immediately, not always smoothly. Some people adjust, some fall away, some resist. But over time, your environment begins to reflect your new baseline. Opportunities that require self-betrayal lose their appeal. Connections that require shrinking feel unsustainable, and what remains feels lighter, more honest, more aligned. This rewriting is silent because it is not about performance, it is about embodiment. You are not trying to become someone with better standards. You are becoming someone who naturally lives by them. There is a quiet confidence that emerges from this, not arrogance, not defensiveness, just a calm knowing of what you will and will not participate in. You no longer need to convince yourself. Your body already knows. This phase marks a significant shift. You are no longer negotiating with life. You are responding to it from a grounded center. Your standards are no longer reactive. They are reflective. They reflect who you are now and who you are becoming. This silent rewriting is not dramatic, but it is decisive. It changes how you move through the world, without force, without announcement, simply by honoring what feels true. And once your standards align with your inner reality, life begins to meet you differently. Not because you demanded it, but because you finally stopped accepting less than what resonates. This is not the end of the transition, but it is the moment your new life begins to take shape. Not in theory, but in practice. Chapter 21. Recognizing the Threshold. There is a moment that does not announce itself as a beginning. It does not feel triumphant. It does not arrive with certainty or excitement. It does not resolve every question you've been carrying. Instead, it feels strangely quiet, almost ordinary, and yet everything is different. This is the threshold. Not the dramatic crossing you might have imagined, but a subtle internal recognition that you are no longer standing where you once were. You may not be able to point to a single event that changed everything. No clear decision, no defining action. Just a growing awareness that returning to the old life is no longer possible, not because it was destroyed, but because it no longer exists in the same way inside you. Recognizing the threshold is not about seeing the future clearly, it is about realizing that the past no longer has authority. You notice this when familiar options feel inaccessible, when old coping mechanisms no longer work, when former identities feel distant, like clothes hanging in a closet you no longer open. This realization can feel unsettling. There is comfort in knowing who you have been. Even if that version of you was unhappy, it was familiar. But at the threshold, familiarity loses its pull. You are not yet anchored in the new, but you are no longer held by the old. This in-between awareness marks a point of no return, not because you cannot go back physically, but because going back would require betraying something you now know. And once something is known, it cannot be unknown. The threshold is recognized through subtle shifts. You stop asking for permission, not intentionally, just naturally. You stop explaining yourself as much, not out of defiance, but because explanation feels unnecessary. You begin making choices that feel obvious to you, even if they make no sense to others. This is not confidence in the traditional sense. It is alignment. You feel less urgency to define yourself, less pressure to prove where you are headed, less need to convince anyone that your path makes sense. You are no longer trying to arrive somewhere. You are inhabiting where you are. The threshold also reveals itself through restraint. You notice that you no longer chase clarity the way you used to. You no longer need immediate answers. You are willing to let things unfold. This patience is not passive. It is rooted in trust. Trust that you are no longer lost, even if you are not yet oriented. At the threshold, fear changes shape. It does not disappear, but it loses dominance. It becomes a signal rather than a command. You notice fear arise, but you no longer obey it automatically. You pause. You choose. This pause is everything. It is the space where a new life begins, not with action, but with presence. You may also notice a quiet grief during this phase. Grief for the version of yourself who struggled without knowing why. Grief for the years spent trying to fit into lives that were too small. Grief for what might have been, had you known sooner. This grief is not regret, it is integration. You are honoring the full arc of your becoming. The threshold is also marked by a shift in how you experience time. You feel less rushed by the future, less haunted by the past. You are more available to the present moment, not because you are trying to be mindful, but because your attention is no longer split. Your energy is no longer scattered across identities you are shedding. It is consolidating. This consolidation feels grounding. You may still feel uncertain, still feel tentative, but beneath that uncertainty is a steadiness you did not have before. A sense that even if you do not know exactly what comes next, you trust yourself to meet it. This is the deepest marker of the threshold. Self-trust without spectacle. No declarations, no dramatic exits. Just a quiet knowing that you are walking forward differently now. The threshold does not require you to leap. It only asks that you stop pretending you are still standing where you began. And once you recognize it, something shifts permanently. You move through life with a different orientation. Less reactive, more intentional, less defined by fear, more guided by coherence. You are no longer waiting for permission to become who you are. You are already becoming. And the threshold, once crossed, does not close behind you. It dissolves, leaving you standing not in a new life yet, but in a new relationship with yourself. One where you no longer abandon your inner truth to maintain an outer structure. This is not the end of the journey, but it is the end of pretending you haven't begun. Chapter 22. Stepping into the life that has been waiting. The new life does not arrive all at once. It does not appear fully formed. It does not replace the old overnight. It does not announce itself with certainty or grandeur. It begins quietly. So quietly that you may not recognize it at first. It shows up as small shifts in behavior, subtle changes in choice, gentle redirections of attention. You begin saying yes to things you once ignored, no to things you once tolerated. You move differently through familiar spaces. This is how the new life begins, not with a leap, but with alignment. The life that has been waiting for you does not demand reinvention. It asks for embodiment. It does not require you to become someone else. It invites you to stop resisting who you already are. You may notice that effort feels different now, not forced, not draining. When you act in alignment, energy returns, not as adrenaline but as steadiness. You feel capable without strain, engaged without urgency, motivated without pressure. This is how you know you are stepping into the right life. The new life does not need constant reassurance. It does not require you to push through resistance. It unfolds through resonance. You are drawn toward what supports you. You naturally disengage from what does not. There is less drama in your choices, less justification, less negotiation. Not because you have become rigid, but because clarity now lives in your body, not just your mind. You may still encounter uncertainty. Stepping into a new life does not eliminate doubt. But doubt no longer paralyzes you. It becomes part of the movement rather than a barrier to it. You take steps without needing to see the entire path. You trust that each step reveals the next, This trust is not blind, it is earned. Earned through every phase you have already walked through, every moment of stillness you honored, every pattern you integrated, every standard you rewrote. You did not arrive here by accident. The life that has been waiting is not a reward for suffering. It is a response to honesty. You stopped pretending, stopped forcing, stopped betraying your inner signals, and life adjusted accordingly. This new life may look quieter than the one you imagined years ago, less impressive, less visible, but it feels right, it fits. You feel less fragmented, more whole. You are no longer performing your life, you are living it. Relationships begin to shift. Some deepen, some fade. New ones form, not through effort but through alignment. You find yourself connecting with people who meet you where you are now, not where you were. These connections feel easier, more reciprocal, more grounded. Work changes too, not necessarily in form, but in relationship. You no longer sacrifice yourself for productivity. You engage with purpose rather than pressure. Your contribution becomes an extension of who you are, not a departure from it. Even challenges feel different. You still face obstacles, you still experience loss, but you are not destabilized in the same way. You trust yourself to respond. This trust is the foundation of the new life. You no longer need certainty to move forward. You no longer need approval to choose alignment. You have learned how to listen, and that skill changes everything. The life that has been waiting was never separate from you. It was forming as you were. Every moment of discomfort refined it. Every pause clarified it. Every ending made room for it. You were not delayed. You were preparing. Now, as you step into this life, there is a sense of familiarity. Not because you have lived it before, but because it feels like something you have always known. This is recognition, not achievement. You do not arrive here exhausted. You arrive here present, and presence is the greatest marker of arrival. The old life did not fail. It carried you as far as it could. Now the new life does not need to be forced. It meets you as you are. And as you continue forward, you realize something quietly profound. You were never lost. You were becoming. And the life that has been waiting was never ahead of you. It was unfolding inside you the entire time, waiting only for you to stop resisting and finally step into it.